Warning! This podcast contains swearing, surgical horror, and some subjectively sexy stuff.
As such, it's for adults only.
But most importantly,
transformation of any kind discussed here isn't real.
So don't go seeking sadistic street surgeons on our suggestion.
Violet, you're turning violet, Violet!
There's no medical precedent for what's happening to you.
Puny human.
A naked American man stole my balloon.
What?
It's getting worse.
I'm getting better.
It's too late for me, but you've got to stop them.
Pardon, monsieur, a waffle thin mint. Oh, sir, it's only a tiny little thin one. Now, fuck off, I'm full. Oh, sir.
You're going to endanger us. You're going to endanger our client, the nice lady who paid us in advance before she became a dog.
I will not be threatened by a walking meatloaf.
I wish I were a fish.
You chose poorly.
I'm pricking up my thumb. Something wicked this way comes.
The time has come, the Wallace said,
to talk of scary things.
Of booze, shipwrecks, and Halifax.
Of carcasses and kings.
And why this gee is toiling lots.
And how well-housed victim sinks.
Kulukukukukulay.
Come run away.
From carcasses and kinks. Welcome to the second episode of the Shifty Bastards podcast. My name is Crafty.
And you can call me Llaga.
Together, we're hosting this harrowing hoedown on behalf of clubbed seals and bespoke fursuiters everywhere.
Today, we're going to lovingly tear apart and stitch back together the movie Tusk, a horror comedy written and directed by Kevin Smith.
Of Clerks and Dogma fame.
Ooh. What I had been expecting was something like the Isle of Dr. Moreau, but different. And that's kind of what I got. I thought we were going to get some kind of gene therapy thing, but instead we got a salty self-taught sawbones.
In spite of the fact that I'd listened to Smith's podcast, the Smodcast, as well as subsequent blips and blurbs about his flippered fantasy, I still didn't expect what we found when we finally watched it. Of course, since the Shifty Bastards are all about physical transformation in media, we were keenly counting each element of this masterful catastrophe. I personally counted no less than 6 instances of Wallace, the not-quite-a-protagonist, crapping on Canadians for no good reason. 1 slapdash surgical transformation from a great white prick of a podcaster into a patchwork pinniped. 1.9 people murdered on-screen for all to see. And an off-screen kill count of at least 23 humans who were used for spare parts.
Another little thing that I'll be keeping track of is where are the monsters? Often enough, movies will try and tell you who the good guy is, but then make them only seem to be good if compared to a cartoonishly overdone bad guy. I like to consider characters on a 10-point scale, starting all at 5, and either they gain or lose points as the story progresses.
Before we go any further, I wish to issue a trigger warning for the 2 scenes containing graphic mackerel mastication.
Delicious.
Now, let's take a deep breath and dive headfirst into the frigid waters of Tusk. We open with a disclaimer that this movie is based on actual events. The actual events described involve a Gumtree post.
Wait, what's a Gumtree?
It's the British version of Craigslist.
Ah.
The Gumtree post was sent to Kevin Smith, which he read on his podcast, Smodcast episode number 259, The Walrus and the Carpenter. The ad offered free room and board to a qualified person in exchange for help with household duties and the commitment to spending at least 2 hours per day in a realistic walrus costume. In the ad, the tenant was to behave entirely like a walrus during that time, a fact that sent Smith and his co-host Scott Mosier down the rabbit hole that led to this movie being made.
This was to be a platonic relationship. Now, I concede this is not something that I would have expected to see either, but if you or someone you know has an itch to scratch, who am I to judge consenting adults? Listening to the discussion on this ad on the Smodcast, the men sounded very much like little kids who managed to get their hands on a titty magazine for the first time. Both confused and a little excited and not sure how they felt. After seeing Smith's interpretation on the big screen, fursuiting will never be the same.
By the end of that podcast, he had asked his followers to tweet Walrus yes or Walrus no to help him decide whether to make the movie based on these musings. Eventually it came out that the ad was a hoax written by Brighton poet and prankster Chris Parkinson, who received an associate producer credit on the film as a result.
Special note here, apparently over 400 people replied to the ad. So either the outfit was not a deal breaker or the rents are fucking outrageous over there.
Possibly both. While the disclaimer is up there, we get Serenaded by Gull Song.
Only you would call a gull song a serenade.
I can't help but wax whimsical about the beach.
Am I the only one that gets hungry when hearing birds?
That aviary had to close, okay? And the lawyers say we're not allowed to talk about it. So moving on. This transitions appropriately into the laughter of podcast hosts.
Two less than stellar examples of humanity.
The first is Teddy, played by Haley Joel I See Pod People Osment,
whose name I could never remember, so I just called him Prick. He looks like such a bland, doughy white dude. He could easily have played Moist von Lipwig on Going Postal.
Easily. And the other podcast host is Wallace, played by Justin Spyro the Dragon Long,
who is by far the most awful of the two. So I will be referring to him as Wanker.
Okay, here's a little spoiler. Wallace the Wanker will become the Walrus later in this film.
Shock.
As is foreshadowed by his gigantic and amazingly fake-looking mustache.
Oh, I hope at the very least that it's fake. I would hate to think somebody could actually grow that ridiculousness on purpose. Who looks in the mirror and thinks, I need to invest in a merkin to frame my prison pussy?
Together, they're laughing about an internet video entitled The Kill Bill Kid, which depicts a young man trying to flourish a katana in his garage. This flailing leads to him severing his leg through the right thigh with a surprisingly clean cut for an amateur samurai.
This puts me in mind of Ow, My Balls, one of the most popular TV shows in the movie Idiocracy,
in which Wallace plays a doctor.
I get that slapstick can be funny when it's well done. Just look at Jackie Chan's career. But there's a huge difference between pratfalls and then someone literally being crippled.
That's just not funny, guy.
Here, we also get the first bit of special effects. A cartoonish cross-section of the kid's thigh with one solitary blood spatter effect. After that little blood spurt, Teddy displays some empathy through his tears of laughter, and he says he's starting to feel bad for the Kill Bill Kid.
For that, I will give him half a person point for showing at least a little compassion. Wanker, on the other hand, actually says how lucky the kid is for all of the hits his video has gotten. He even revels for a moment on how awesome losing a limb would be if it meant being internet famous.
Which is a decent bit of foreshadowing.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, he proudly announces that he will be going out of his way to mock the Kill Bill Kid to his face by going to Canada and interviewing him in person.
He plans to ask him questions like, what's your favorite kind of porn?
Because that's what a professional interviewer would ask, right? And that's where I decide to dock him a full person point for sheer malice.
And rightly so. After pitching the next episode, they sign off as Wallace and Teddy by telling everyone to join the Nazi party.
And this is where we're planting a flag about their choice of title for a podcast.
Throughout the rest of the film, anyone associated with it will act as if they've never had to clarify the name they've chosen. And they chose poorly.
But we'll be sure to point out all the times it's clearly a problem as they come up.
For now, we'll move on to the next scene, where Wallace's plane lands in Canada a week later. There, a customs agent notes his face fuzz by calling him a fellow facial hair aficionado. Term I don't believe Wallace deserves, considering the sad state of his mouth merkin.
I rather like this official with the amazing beard that would have made Grizzly Adams proud, while putting wankers to shame. He also is the first example of many as to why you should be careful about being an indiscriminately condescending asshole. Pretty much everyone else Wanker meets in Manitoba is better at hitting him with a verbal mushroom stamp.
Yeah, Wallace was surgically separated from his tact before the story even started. Here, he mentions that he's from New Jersey originally, and LA recently. The agent then calls him a man caught betwixt devils and kings. Wallace eventually catches on that this is a hockey joke, but that he doesn't follow hockey, something I never would have picked up on myself as a complete sports heathen. And it's a good thing I was never in this situation, judging by the agent's reaction.
Yeah, he would have climbed over that counter to feed you your own shoe like Bruins Mike Milbury going after the fan in 1979.
I don't get that reference. What the agent does in response is to tell Wallace to take his hands off the counter. Wallace says, "Really?" Agent affirms. Wallace says, "Sorry." Agent says, "Sorry." And Wallace can't help but repeat, "Sorry," which looks like a reflexive bit of douchebaggery, but we should still judge him for it. Let's take a look at the scoreboard. How would you score that one, my lady?
I'm docking him half a point for being ethnically insensitive.
Agreed. I'm adding the first tick to the number of times Wallace craps on Canadians.
Grizzly Canadams all round pulls off the pithy and poignant with practiced ease when dealing with the ignorant unwashed masses. Shutting down Wanker's condescending attitude without a filter is a bit cathartic.
If only all customs agents were so playfully pithy.
Beware the rubber gloves.
Hands of blue, 2x2, eh? Here, the agent explains the can-a-do's and can-a-don'ts to our oblivious traveler. Number 1, don't tell a Canadian you don't follow hockey. Number 2, Canadians are never sad. They're red and white, but never blue.
I love that line.
While I can't agree that America invented sadness, we sure have mastered institutionalizing it. The last of the canadon'ts are that Canadians aren't nice, they're optimistic, they're also tolerant, and hung like moose.
That was probably just to see if Wankface would actually dare to call the TSA agent out on being hung like a moose. I also was going to penalize the agent for bullying him here a bit, but he was doing it to shut down Wanker's bullshit. And clearly also having some fun as he gives our schmuck a great sidelong glance.
That glance was charming as hell. So, they laugh, and then the agent gets right back to work. Very professional. He asks Wallace about his business in Manitoba, so he explains the premise of the Not See Party podcast. The TSA agent is upset by the title, and Wallace acts like he's never had to clarify that before, like a complete asshole would do.
The explanation behind the name of their podcast is a lame play on words that really only works if you're reading it. His co-host, Prick, doesn't travel, so he does not see who or what Wanker will be describing to him in the studio.
So they are clearly not actually affiliated with Nazis in any way.
I mean, really, how can you call yourself something like that and not think you'd be getting flack for being a hate group?
I'm pretty sure this is Wallace's way of setting up some social leverage for when he talks about the show. It lets him act all hurt and politely indignant that someone would ever think such horrible things out of sheer ignorance of such homophones. He just wants a chance to call everyone homophonophobic.
Stupid is not illegal. Stupid is not illegal. Stupid is not illegal.
After the CATSA foolishly lets Wallace into Canada proper, we see him arrive at the Kill Bill Kid's home.
Just after he's getting a call from his girlfriend, Allie, so we can hear her ringtone.
Which is the Margarita song, a techno remix of Kevin's impression of Al Pacino from another podcast of his, Hollywood Babble-On, all of which will be linked in the show notes.
He dismisses the call and sends her to voicemail.
That will come up later as standard behavior for him while on the road.
To be fair, I don't blame him for sending her to voicemail since he is right outside Kill Bill Kid's house, complete with what seems like a funerary wreath out front. Of course, knowing how he behaves later, it's fairly safe to assume that he continued treating her like garbage and didn't call her back until he was in mortal danger.
He walks around to the back of the house while clutching his jacket, showing he's clearly not prepared for this trip into the Great White North. He sees the Kill Bill Kid's memorial service complete with the family gathered around a wheelchair and weeping, with the would-be interviewee's photo in it.
Let me get this straight. You fly to another country. At least a week after you made the appointment, you didn't call the day before or on the way to your appointment confirming the person was still up for meeting you? I mean, he could have had a cold or explosive diarrhea.
And it usually takes a week or so to set up a memorial service, so he could have offed himself shortly after hearing them talk about him in the first scene. Of course, all Wallace says in response to the service is shit.
Now, you would think this catastrophic turn would have struck a chord with Wanker and leave him to ponder about his life's choices and what would have led him here.
Having possibly inspired a suicide.
But no, he's just pissed. This man is so full of bad decisions, it's hard to feel sorry for this asshole.
And in the next scene, we get to see him spewing his thoughts on this into a voicemail for his co-host at a bar that might be called the Wobbly H, a sexual position mentioned occasionally in some of Smith's work. Wallace is on the phone at the bar, leaving a stream of consciousness message for Teddy about the fate of the Kill Bill Kid and his plan to find something for the show. He mentions that the Kill Bill Kid killed himself with the sword from the video. Seppuku? Something which I would personally call out his parents for, having not taken the sword from him after he cut his fucking leg off.
The unbelievable jerk that is our protagonist is actually bitching to Prick about the young man having the nerve to commit suicide before the interview, and how inconsiderate it was, all while implying he could have at least waited until after the interview to off himself. I'm docking him a person point for treating another human being as a thing.
And as if having a kid go up the tracks on his behalf wasn't enough, Wallace follows up his self-righteous screed by crapping on Canadians a second time, when he says, "Fucking Winnipeg, it's painfully boring up here."
Well, fucking boring, huh? You festering nutsack.
May you live in interesting times.
I think it's safe to say that shortly after this point in the story, he will never be bored again. Also, while I've never been there, Winnipeg is the capital of Manitoba and looks to be a frickin' blast. It's got museums, zoos, spas, cool architecture, sports, building places, and gambling. It's just like Chicago.
Without the crumbling infrastructure and only a fraction of the murder.
Apropos of nothing, he ends the voicemail with Bob and Doug McKenzie's signature "Kuloo-koo-koo-koo-koo-koo," a great callback to Canadian culture that permeated into the American ethos via Second City TV, which you have to check out if you've never heard of it. Seriously, it was the Canadian Saturday Night Live before they passed the torch to Kids in the Hall.
His voicemail gets cut off, just like I need to cut off Crafty here before he starts gushing about Ed Grimley and the chicken lady. So he heads to the restroom to break the seal, meaning he's going to have to piss every 5 minutes now. Fun random fact, alcohol suppresses your body's ability to absorb water, so it just passes right through. That's why when drinking, you need to pee more often.
And in one of the first examples of a serendipitous piss I recall seeing in cinema, he finds something interesting posted on a corkboard above the urinal.
Being a woman, I don't visit men's rooms often, yet I've never been into a men's room that had a urinal with corkboards above it.
I can't think of any I've seen either. Perhaps it's a bar bathroom thing?
I suppose it is a captive audience.
A captive of Mother Nature.
I just think that the intended audience would have their hands otherwise occupied, and you probably wouldn't want them handling the paper while using the facility, let alone that it might end up as some sort of target practice.
I wonder if the ladies' room has corkboards on the inside of the stall doors.
Nope.
Who wouldn't be grateful for something to read, as well as a ready supply of emergency paper?
Perhaps it's just a Canadian thing. Or it could be just really effing weird. Anyway, on the corkboard, amid all the other miscellaneous crap, is a handwritten letter with a few of the contact tags torn off from the bottom.
And it's written in cursive, meaning there will soon be an entire generation of Americans unable to read it. I imagine some vintage movie reviewer, 100 or so years from now, giving Kevin Smith posthumous shit for lazy scribbling on the page instead of writing out the voiceover we're about to hear.
I theorize this is why it's actually being narrated by the madman we're about to meet, Mr. Howard Howe.
As played by Michael Parks, whose prolific career goes all the way back to the 60s and includes both Kill Bill and Twin Peaks. The voiceover describes a well-traveled man living alone in a house too big to maintain with his waning mobility. Howe is essentially paraphrasing the Gumtree posts we discussed in the intro, omitting the part about spending time in a realistic walrus suit because he doesn't want to spoil the surprise for his would-be tenants?
Or scare them off.
Wallace is so enamored with this potential lead that he naturally takes the entire letter and walks off with it.
Instead of simply tearing off one of the contact tabs, like a normal member of society, since his pettiness seems to know no bounds.
Seriously, social contract fucker. What's going on? From a narrative standpoint, this would make it harder for his friends to find him should something go horribly awry. Not that it's at all likely somewhere as boring as Winnipeg.
No, never.
Cut now to Wallace at the A to Z Quickie Mart, calling Mr. Howe for directions as he prepares for his journey to meet the charmingly world-weary author of this strange and interesting handbill. This scene will be revisited later in more detail, but there are a few things we should mention.
This is where he picks up the soon-to-be iconic lug cup, which will show up throughout the rest of the film.
That cup was so much his comfort blanket in all of this that there should have been a scene where he draws a face on it and talks to it like Wilson in Castaway. While on the phone, he has to ask the two blonde clerks for pen and paper so he can write down Howe's address. This is another time where he proves himself to be woefully unprepared for anything.
The letter he took from the bar is written on paper, yet he is demanding paper from the clerks. He is also theoretically an interviewer, but he doesn't have a writing implement.
When Howe tells him Bifrost is his destination, Wallace says, "Ooh, Bifrost. Sounds erotic." Which, no, it doesn't.
I don't know. It could be home to some sexually liberated yetis. Who's to judge? Do you think they felch?
I'm not going down that rabbit hole with you again.
Wrong buns, hon.
I'm shutting your sexy talk down with my nerdgasm, because Bifrost is also the name of the rainbow bridge that connects our world to Asgard in Norse mythology, something that shows up in the Thor movies and comics.
You're just Thor about the rainbow connection.
As he's writing down the address, Wallace craps on Canadians for the third time. When he asks the clerks how long it'll take to drive to Bifrost from the A to Z, they tell him it's about 2 hours, and he just can't help but emphasize the aboot when telling Howe his ETA.
Let me take a moment to point out that he, while in Canada, is mocking Canadians for having a Canadian accent. I'm worried that this is actually an American thing and that regardless of where we go, even in our own country, we think it's everyone else that sounds weird. I'm planting a personal flag here. If you only speak English, yet cannot do and or say the word enunciate, you have forfeited your right to critique someone else that is able to express themselves in more than one language.
Even though Canadian English isn't another language. You know that, right?
You're so judgy.
Before we move on to the next scene, I want to mention that Girl Clerks 1 and 2 are played by Harley Quinn Smith and Lily Rose Melody Depp, the daughters of Kevin Smith and Johnny Depp, respectively.
Even though I know what's coming, it is really hard to feel bad for the guy that just arbitrarily treats others as garbage. I've already penalized Wanker for treating people as things. As for the ladies, I would have dinged them for their apathy towards customers, but this is forgiven due to Wanker's behavior.
Agreed.
We wrap up Howe's voiceover from the handbill just in time for an establishing shot of Wanker arriving at Pippi Hill after driving through all of North Buttfuck with his cup that is big enough to wear as a helmet. He still hasn't gotten a winter coat, or for that matter, any recording gear with which to do his job.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. He parks and stumbles up the hill to the front door to interview the old man that resides there. Wandering in, he meets Mr. Howard Howe in his spacious and eclectically decorated living room.
It's amazing how much kitsch they have on the wall there. It looks like they raided the attic of my crazy great aunt and put everything they could find on the walls.
Yeah, seriously. It looks like an Applebee's exploded all over the inside of a Bugaboo Creek. Mr. Howe himself is an older wheelchair-bound gent who looks a bit like the illegitimate love child of Christopher Walken and Colonel Sanders.
And for some reason, he's dressed as an aging Fred from Scooby-Doo, complete with ascot.
He's all set to greet his guest, but is cut short when Wallace blurts out his need for a bathroom while shaking the damn chug-a-lug.
Now, I'm sorry, but is this not one of the most touted benefits of being a man? That you can take a piss behind just about any tree? I'm sure he passed 1 billion of them. And if he doesn't like doing that, then why the ever-effervescent hell did he get that behemoth of a drink for a 2-hour drive?
Excuse me, but gigantic sugary drinks are an American tradition, if not a staple.
I'll staple his dick hole shut.
Ow.
After a rushed sightseeing tour through the house in search of a toilet, Winker is slightly disturbed while using the facilities since there is a doll in a crocheted dress on the tank of the toilet staring disapprovingly at his junk,
which he turns away so as to avert the creepy doll-eyed gaze. Once relieved, Wanker returns to the living room and sits next to the fireplace to begin his interview of the old man that he perceived to be a desperately lonely cripple. Wallace starts to pick his brain for the stories of his life so that Wanker can mock him.
How pray tell, is this interview supposed to happen? Again, Wanker never brought in or set up any recording equipment of any kind. Hell, use your goddamn cell phone to record if you don't have any form of paper. But no, he wasn't taking notes. This guy is so inept at his job, it disgusts me.
Mr. Howe, after providing tea for his guest,
and only his guest,
sneaky, he tries to break the ice with a fart joke, and as the conversation goes on, he seems totally fascinated with just how crass Wallace is. As Wallace wanders back and forth, harshly critiquing the man's country and home, he acts like a 5-year-old, manhandling all the curios within arm's reach.
The camera does a quick zoom in on Mr. Howe's hand as he maneuvers the electric wheelchair around, trying to keep pace. I think this was to help establish exactly how, quote-unquote, harmless Mr. Howe is. That is a lie on so many levels. He even casually crosses his legs in the wheelchair later, in spite of his claim that they had been rendered completely useless.
Wallace, naturally, is completely oblivious to this. While happily quaffing his tea, he talks about his own grandmother and mother. Grandmother has crap on her walls, and his mother has no idea what podcasts are. Two similarities they share with Mr. Howe. For this, he calls them terrible and out of touch immediately before he turns to Howe and tells him, "Oh, but you're great."
This is where Mr. Howe starts talking about himself and explaining that the items lining his walls are his life, then lamenting that his legs are no longer functioning, leaving him non-ambulatory. Which is when he looks to clarify that Wanker is less interested in the room than Howe's history.
Wallace, in the process of describing his trip, calls the man's country a shithole. The fourth time, he disses Canadians to their faces. He bemoans how the last person he was supposed to interview did him the disservice of killing themselves before he was done with them, leaving him high and dry without content for his podcast. But he claims to have been given some hope when he saw the handbill and now compares Mr. Howe to a gold mine of stories.
If he really felt that way, then with no means to record, how the fuck is he to cash in? Again, it is so hard to feel bad for Wanker. When Howe asks what a podcast is, we get a flashback to the Nazi Party podcast at who the fuck knows when, where he had just said, premature ejaculation, with no context that would help it be funny. Yet somehow this flashback is supposed to be educating the elderly gentleman on what a podcast is.
Frankly, it would have made more sense to us and his target if he had simply whipped out his phone and played the damn podcast from Mr. Howe. As if that was a good enough explanation, we return to the chat in progress as Wallace compliments the tea, stopping short of jizzing into the cup.
Wanker happily declares that it's like he's never had tea before, like he's popping his cherry. This guy is so high class. I mean, seriously, I don't pretend to be super refined, but what the hell goes through your head that you would say something like that, especially to someone you've known for less than 10 minutes?
Yeah, he also doesn't seem to notice that he's the only one drinking the tea. Still, Mr. Howe volunteers that it's so good because the leaves have been steeped in brandy.
And a special secret ingredient that we will soon see the effects of.
The bit about brandy is Howe's segue to talk about his encounter with Ernest Hemingway, for which we get a black and white flashback where he and Howe are serving on a ship together in World War II.
The actor they chose for Hemingway looks a bit like a cross between Captain Kangaroo and Benny Hill. The sole purpose of this flashback is to give context to a quote, It was something about doing things sober and drunk.
The quotation is, "Always do sober what you said you'd do drunk. That will teach you to keep your mouth shut."
Sorry. It struck me as so unremarkable I didn't write it down. The guy was clearly a hack.
Oh, sure. The author of A Farewell to Arms and The Old Man in the Sea was a hack. Clearly.
Should have been Farewell to Legs.
I don't know how to feel about that. Back by the fire, Howe gestures to the empty bottle of brandy he'd shared with Ernest Hemingway. Wallace is enthralled, as Howe comments that his curios are all mere objects until they've got a story to go with.
This is where we actually get what I consider a better turn of phrase, referring to the mementos as a drawbridge to history.
Wallace's attention wanders to the mantel, where what looks like a femur, longer than his forearm, is on display. He can't help but take it down for a closer look. Howe flatly informs him that it's the baculum, or penis bone, from a walrus cock, filling Wallace with ghoulish glee. Once he knows what it is, he proceeds to mime jerking it off and then getting a facial. All while Mr. Howe explains that he feels that the walrus is a far more noble creature than mankind.
With this example we've been given to this point, I'm still having a hard hard time arguing with him. And here's where Crafty comments about how much he loves the hammer. And Wallace then asks how if he bought it from a head shop. That one's on you, Crafty.
Head shop, get it? Because it's from a penis.
I need a fun random fact as a palate cleanser. Hey, there's some biblical scholars, and I'm using that term very loosely here, that say that the rib taken from Adam to make Eve was actually Adam's baculum.
Ooh, that's an interesting way to answer the question of why we're one of the few mammals that don't have one.
Imagine some embarrassed parent back before sea trying to explain that to their kid. What better possible reason could there be besides God took it? For a whimsical tale involving the part that men prize most, they needed a noble purpose for its missing member. So they decided that it was used to make all women, starting with Eve. A few years later, they invented censorship. They then remembered that it was a naughty bit that they had referenced, so changed it to rib. This is also the same time that they changed all instances of the word penis in the Bible to foot.
I need a citation.
Check the show notes.
All I see here is a link to a Daily Mail article. Okay, then. I need a new co-host instead. Moving on. How describes the circumstances leading to his acquisition of the baculum?
In the form of another flashback, where he describes being stranded on the Isle of Ponder Rock with a walrus.
Did you know that Ponder Rock is a reference to Smodcast episode number 224, Ponder Rockin' with Emo Kev, wherein they discuss a cassette of a 19-year-old Kevin Smith's banal musings?
Inspired by Auguste Rodin?
Is that a reference to The Thinker?
My mind is like a rusty bear trap. I have no idea what it's going to snap on. Anywho, during story time, we notice Wanker is feeling the effects of the tea and begins to look like a kindergartner fighting nap time. He barely stops short of doing that whole mushy face thing.
Mr. Howe goes on about his ship, the Anastasia, looking for great white sharks in Siberia, when they hit an iceberg one night and sank. After a touch of research, we found it was actually a cargo ship.
What the fuck? A cargo ship? Why was that being used to hunt sharks? Oh, and we interrupt this flashback to bring you back to the present just to watch Wanker, for the first time, blowing on his wonderful tea, before we return you back to your previously scheduled flashback.
Where Howe explains that he was the only survivor that night, swimming in the dark seas and listening to the last of his shipmates succumbing to either sharks or the icy chill of the frigid Arctic waters. He describes feeling something brush by his legs while swimming for dry land.
To which our brilliant dipshit responds by asking,
How scared were you?
What kind of question is that for an interviewer? If you told me this character was mentally stunted, that would excuse some of his behavior.
Some.
Although I have known some 8-year-olds that are more competent and compassionate human beings. Just saying.
We now get a monologue from the old man about survival of the fittest, describing how he barely makes it to shore, wearing his life buoy like a purse, the very flotation aid that we see adorning the wall of his house.
Okay, also, I am not a nautical kind of gal, so I actually had to look up what that thing was called. I thought those were simply the donut flavor of life preservers.
Once on the island, he describes the only occupant, a walrus, as a gentle cow who mothers him like a shivering baby chick.
For some reason, he's decided to mix his farm metaphors, just like a city kid.
Mentioning one of the only people he ever trusted in his youth, a janitor named Mr. Tuskegee, Howe dubs his walrus savior Mr. Tusk.
As lame a name for a walrus as Mr. Waggy is for a dog.
Howe explains that he was with his companion for the next 6 months before being rescued. He also notices Wallace beginning to lose coordination and states that his experience has taught him humans are not to be trusted.
Unlike the noble and stalwart walrus.
As Howe wraps up this part of his story, Wallace keels over from his chair and collapses onto the floor, unconscious.
In a nice, tidy heap, careful not to make a mess.
To which Howe says, There, it's all right now," and for the first time calls Wallace Mr. Tusk. Fade to black and open on Wanker's O-face.
Something that left me wondering if he was dreaming until I realized this was actually a flashback.
Yes, a flashback of him back in L.A. with his smolderingly sexy Latina girlfriend, Allie Leon. as played by Genesis Rodriguez.
Who is currently blowing him off screen. She pauses in order to try and convince him not to go to Canada.
He should have listened.
She's trying to explain to him that it's a terrible thing to go to Kill Bill Kid's house to mock him. It was bad enough that they were doing it on the show, but it's even more cruel to do it to the man's face.
To which Wallace makes some lame excuses, claiming that it's not something that he actually wants to do, but rather that he needs to for the show. As I consider myself an artist, I personally feel that that's a shitty excuse, used by lazy content creators who are simply going for the cheap shots like some half-assed troll.
Just how do you divide a lazy troll ass? Do you go by the crack down the middle, or pick from the upper or lower?
I'm of the opinion that troll ass is inherently scrofulous and crap-encrusted, so take your pick.
Then I pick Tananda's left cheek.
Okay, that trollops the exception that proves the rule. Thank you very much, Little Myth Contradiction.
Since she's still reluctant to finish, he tries jerking off, but she denies him that too.
Good.
That was bad planning, dear. Trying to get a man to focus on such genuine critique while so distracted by his manmates is a waste of time. She also offers to go with him to Canada, which he shoots down.
Yeah, he claims his co-host Teddy,
the prick,
gets weird if she goes on trips with him, as though he's jealous of her.
We'll find out later that Wanker really just wants to be able to pork whatever Canadian beavers cross his path.
Which is stupid, as Allie is stunning and loves him enough to attempt to talk him back from the edge of losing his humanity.
Which he is going to do in a very real sense quite soon. She even goes as far as to suggest that if she can't go with him, she might leave him, and reminds him that he once used to be a compassionate person. He used to get high and cry while watching Winnie the Pooh.
Wallace responds with all the bland machismo he can muster, that such compassion had made him weak. He's much better now, having ditched it, which allows him to make serious bank on his podcast.
She even underscores that the old Wallace also had me. But he ignores that point too, which clearly hurts her a bit, so he makes a shallow attempt to try to cheer her up.
By making fun of her accent, which she doesn't have.
But that doesn't stop him from doing his best parody of a Latino, which is so bad he may as well have been imitating Miss Swan.
Oh yeah, he look like a manatee.
It was really that bad. But she still loves him enough to try and find him funny. It's sad that the upside of this whole scene was her dissing his mustache, telling him that it doesn't work for him.
We end the scene with him getting a pity blow to finish him off, the camera framing his upside-down face from above, which is how he comes to in Howe's mansion as he awakes from his tea-induced coma.
Drool trailing from the corner of his mouth.
So pretty. He's sitting in an antique-looking manual wheelchair in a very spacious room with a granny shawl and quilt covering his lap.
Having just woken up and likely while still under the influence of some kind of drug cocktail, I will cut him a bit of slack for the upcoming dopiness.
On the far side of the room, we see Mr. Howe in his own electric wheelchair, polishing something long and white.
Which will be more meaningful later in the film. Mr. Howe welcomes him back to consciousness, sets down the white thing, and spins a tale about a spider having bit him on the leg.
A brown recluse, no less.
Fuckers better stay reclusive, that's all I can say. I've got bug bombs and I don't hesitate to use them.
I like that stylish bandolier you keep them on.
Never leave home without it.
Howe brings him the Chug-a-Lug cup for solace, and when asked for Wallace's phone, he says the doctor had stepped on it and destroyed it. Wallace blearily says, "There was a doctor here?" Howe confirms as much and says the doctor's name was Moussier. He drops the hint that the doctor had to take drastic measures to save his life.
Wanker then peels back his blanket and sees the handiwork of Dr. Moosejaw.
Moussier.
His left leg having been cut off above the knee, complete with gruesome grade school quality stitching. And I'm also guessing this took place overnight. I think that's how this madman of Manitoba is gauging the amount of medication to give to Wanker by seeing how long it takes him to recover.
Ooh, that's smart, actually. Wouldn't do any good to kill him before the culmination of his plans.
Wanker is justifiably panicking now. And this is where I'm torn. I mean, he did say he didn't need both legs, and also that it would be worth being maimed to be famous. Frankly, when someone else was on the chopping block, he thought it was funny. But at the moment, he can't seem to find the situation humorous at all.
For some reason.
At this point, I know I should feel bad for him, but it's just not there.
Howard waxes poetic and quotes some Tennyson during the panic, showing that he's perhaps not taking the situation quite as seriously as he should.
And for the first time, Wanker starts asking reasonable questions like, why am I here? Why am I not in a hospital?
I suppose that means he needed some real calamity to enter his life before he would start behaving kind of like an adult. Mad Manitoba Mr. Howe actually tries to wave off these concerns as hospitals have diseases, so he's better off at his home.
Wait, seriously? That's the excuse you're going to go with?
It's pretty lame as excuses go.
Wanker demands to speak with Dr. Moosejaw,
Moosier.
but is told that the doctor is on his rounds.
Wallace shrieks, "What rounds? We're in the middle of nowhere!" And Howe, slowly becoming strangely giddy, says he's been to the middle of nowhere, and it is a ghastly place.
Wanker then attempts to stand, much to Howe's growing amusement.
But he can't because there's a belt securing him to the chair. Howe tells him that it's there so he doesn't fall out of the chair before Dr. Moosier's spinal anesthetic wears off, which is when he'll regain his faculties. Well, most of his faculties anyway. This is where Howe is clearly just twisting the knife.
Okay, eccentricity is not a punishable offense, but Mad Manitoba has gone over the edge. I will dock him for 3 person points for torture, and another one for enjoying it so damn much. Wallace then demands to use the phone to call his family, and Mad Manitoba comes up with a new, even more spectacular excuse.
Yeah, he says the doctor told him to remove all the phones from the house so that he wouldn't be disturbed.
It's not like our lunatic had even been putting much of an effort into this, but at this point, he isn't even trying. It's like he's making excuses to a child instead of saying their dog is dead.
Don't worry, Billy. Buttons is staying with your grandpa, upstate, on a farm we can never visit. Oh, and you were brought to us by a stork. Also, stop making that face or it'll freeze that way forever. He clearly gives 0 fucks about making his lies plausible.
Mad Manitoba ends this conversation by telling him to take a nap so he can be rested up for dinner. He even gives his condolences.
While laughing.
Before rolling away to leave Wallace crippled in the solitude of this depressingly empty room. It's actually an important point in his life as he's got a chance to consider his behavior up to this moment.
Like laughing at the Kill Bill Kid and saying he'd happily sacrifice his own leg for fame.
And hopefully reclaim a bit of his humanity in the process.
Admittedly, it's way the fuck too late, considering what his future holds.
But perhaps the comatose gerbil laying in the hamster wheel of his morality finally rolls over to advance the wheel just a little bit.
Now, it's the next scene, and time for dinner. They're sitting at one of those unnecessarily long tables for aristocrats, and Mad Manitoba comments that his guest is not eating. Wanker, looking a bit despondent, replies that he can't move his arms, something Howe attributes to the morphine.
Which is weird, since he was using them earlier to drink from the chug-lug cup. So that means at some point between the room and dinner, he got dosed again. It was in the chug-a-lug.
Et tu, chug-a-lug?
After a brief exchange, Wanker starts questioning whether there was a spider at all. Mr. Howe plays this off again by treating him as a child.
He does the itsy-bitsy spider in the mocking voice of a simpleton, causing Wallace's composure to snap. He begins shouting to be set free and calling the old man a psycho. Howe's response,
I love this so much, is to stand up from his electric wheelchair, walk to the end of the long table, smack his paralyzed captive across the face, and then walk back casually to his mechanical wheelchair in order to finish his dinner.
While Howe eats, he drops the rest of his pretense and does a quick summary of his plans for Wallace. As he explains that for some time he's been working on a very realistic walrus suit. And with a few minor modifications, it should fit Wallace perfectly.
For the moment, he does not include that the modifications are to be of Wanker and not the suit. This is an important detail.
While he's in the suit, he must be a walrus and behave as a walrus would. Another aspect of the Gumtree post that made it into the plot of the film. Wallace starts pleading,
which Howe mocks openly.
And when asked why he's doing this, he responds that he's looking for the answer to a question older than the Sphinx. Is man indeed a walrus at heart?
This proves too much for Wanker, and he starts screaming for help. Mad Manitoba responds in kind by gleefully howling and snarling in accompaniment, highlighting just how deep in the middle of North Buttfuck they are, with nary a soul in earshot. We now cut to his girlfriend, Allie, back in the States, in what is probably a flashback to just after she tried to call Wanker while he was pulling up to Kill Bill Kid's house. She's doing what looks like a Snapchat confession, saying that she almost told him.
The camera pans back from a close-up of her face while she's explaining how much Wallace has been hurting her emotionally. She also says how much he's changed for the worse. And at this point, she hates him, but hates herself more for being afraid to leave him. Now, coming into frame from off-screen is a hand that comforts her by caressing her cheek, showing us she's actually confessing to a person.
Or maybe a thing.
Dun-dun-dun-dun.
Let's be clear, though. She is cheating on him because he is cheating on her and is ultimately unhappy all round as a result. Look, seriously, if you're really unhappy in your relationship, then end it. If the person you're with treats you like garbage and that's not because you want that, you're in the wrong relationship. Adulting is hard. Move on. I'm docking her a person point for stringing Wanker along and another for trying to force him to be something that he's not.
Yeah, essentially this confession is highlighting that Wallace has been stripping away his humanity on his own. And unbeknownst to her, Mad Manitoba will simply be finishing the process,
making the outside match what's within. We interrupt this flashback for yet another flashback by cutting to the podcast studio in which Wanker and Prick are talking about this very trip to Canada.
They're playing foosball and talking about what Teddy will be doing with Allie while Wallace is abroad. Teddy is taking her to the Getty Art Museum in LA, since that's the kind of thing Wanker is never willing to do with her. What's worse, Wallace's excuse for leaving her behind is that the fangirls tend to be hottish. An argument that essentially boils down to, come on.
He says he knows it sounds shitty, but that's sure as fuck not gonna stop him. Minus another person point for being a two-timing lech. Prick tries to talk him out of doing it and says that she is a great woman and he shouldn't disrespect her like that and he should stay and be a better adult. And a plus person point to Prick for calling out his bros BS and giving him a chance to not make a mistake. Naturally, Wanker disregards that advice to go find Canadian Strange.
Before we move on to the next scene, I want to point out that the foosball table makes for another tasty bit of visual foreshadowing, since the players on the table have flippers rather than actual feet. Now, back in the present, Wallace is sitting stiffly in the living room where he first met Mad Manitoba, which is only dimly lit by a fire in the fireplace, when he hears Allie calling his cell phone.
The one supposedly broken by Dr. Moosjaw.
Moussier.
He then very poorly maneuvers the wheelchair as if he has the parking brake on to where the phone is by the fire, just missing her call.
We see Allie in her bathroom while brushing her teeth as she plugs in her phone to charge, frustrated that she still couldn't reach Wallace. She leaves her cell phone in the bathroom but apparently keeps the ringer off, so she doesn't hear him return her call. Next to her phone is someone else's cell, presumably the person with whom she's cheating on Wallace.
Note that both of these are being charged while over the bathroom sink.
Yeah, that's asking for trouble.
Effing morons. Also, a petty detail here, the time on her phone is 9:29, but on Wanker's it reads 11:18. So I have to ask, where the holy caribou fuck is he?
The time zones are just 2 hours off each other, so his phone should be reading 11:29. So why are the minutes jacked up?
One could try to spin that it is the power of the crazy bubble distorting time, but really the continuity guy for this movie whiffed.
Wallace is forced to leave a message which seethes with believable terror, saying he's in Manitoba, about 2 hours from Winnipeg, but he does not actually give the address.
For those that are not familiar with Manitoba, it is about the same size as Mexico. And with a 2-hour drive clue, we now have reduced it to an area of about the size of Ohio to find him in. He could have at least said the name of the city if he doesn't recall the exact street.
Even some of the cities he passed through on the way there would have been useful. Apparently Wallace's subconscious doesn't want to be found. Here, we also get the 5th and 6th times he craps on Canadians when he says he's in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, and then tearfully tells Allie's voicemail, "I don't want to die in Canada," which is genuinely funny if still shitty. During this call, he also tells her to call the police for him. Think about that for a second. He's holding a phone while telling her voicemail to call the police.
911 works in Canada too, fuck that. They can locate you by your cell phone's GPS. So hang up and call 911 yourself and get help that is local to where you are. Even if you said, whoops, my bad, I didn't mean to call 911. They still have to send an officer to check and be sure you're not being threatened into saying, I didn't mean to call.
Yeah, he should have hung up right then and called 911. Then he can panic at the best local authorities, those who can actually help him, instead of a lady in another country with no professional training in emergency situations.
That's right, everyone. 911 works in many countries around the world, including motherfucking Antarctica. So that means even an earless seal could call 911.
Keep in mind that it's not the emergency number for all countries, so if you're planning to go to another country, look that shit up before you leave.
While it's highly unlikely you will need it, you don't want to have to Google that after getting into a fender bender in Mongolia just to find out that there it's 105 instead.
So after Wanker leaves this message on her voicemail, he then calls Teddy, his co-host.
Again, not the fucking police.
Here's where we get the big reveal, as we see the phone next to Allie's is the one ringing now, meaning Teddy is cuckolding Wallace while he's off cheating on Allie.
In a way, it makes sense Wanker has been foisting off his boyfriend duties to Prick, that this doughy co-host then also fills all the other nooks and crannies left empty by his dereliction. Although I am still gonna dock him a person point for violating bro code.
So we see Teddy walk into the bathroom to brush his teeth where he notices the incoming call, but opts to ignore it so he can go back to stooping Allie.
While I acknowledge he doesn't know that his so-called friend is in danger, I say so-called because it's hard to consider him the man's friend in earnest since he's cucking him good. Do you need lube for that?
I'm gonna say yes. While also considering the last message that he got from Wanker, I can't fault him for ignoring it. There's no reason to think that there would be anything other than something douchey.
Wanker leaves a similar message for him, asking him to call the cops along with all the same non-directions on wherever the fuck he is. This entire time, though, Man Manitoba has been walking back and forth in the shadows, as yet unnoticed by Wanker as he watches and listens to him make both phone calls.
You have to wonder how big that man's balls are to allow for the phone calls in the first place.
His confidence is staggering.
If not merely the depths of his insanity.
Semantics.
But then again, he's not been caught yet, so he does have some justification. And we'll soon find out just how many have fallen victim to his whims.
Get ready to count the faces that make up each of his handcrafted skin suits. Yup, we see more than one suit.
Hal then quietly takes the baculum from the mantle. Wielding the 2-foot-long dick bone as a club, he clocks the ever-loving crap out of Wanker, cutting off the message and knocking him right out of the chair.
So much for that seatbelt. And before Wanker loses consciousness, Man Manitoba informs him that his life, as he knew it, is over. If he wishes to continue living, he will either be a walrus or nothing at all. I am docking Man Manitoba 3 person points here for going all Dr. Evil for realsies.
If Smith wanted to go full-on comedy here, he could have had Michael Parks try his hand at an impression of a Sean Connery impression by saying something like, "I'll take the penis mightier, Trebek." Although I doubt his character has ever seen Saturday Night Live. Second City TV is more likely. Possibly Kids in the Hall.
Speaking of cutting off Crafty, we now come to the arts and crafts portion of this film, where Mad Manitoba shows off his embroidery skills. Allie wakes up and listens to Wanker's message while performing her morning ablutions.
Realizing he's in trouble, she sees he called Teddy too and tries to call back. Up in Howe's charming little sewing room, the phone rings nearby, inspiring him to taunt his captive in a sing-song voice. Well, someone's looking for Wallace.
This is the part where I do actually start to feel bad for Wanker. It was one thing for Karmic Justice to claim his leg as penance for making fun of the Kill Bill Kid, as well as joking that he didn't need both his legs if it meant having a bigger audience. While it's not illegal to be an asshole, the rest of the process he goes through is a bit overboard. Unless, of course, you go by the Bible, which actually has sayings about your actions coming back to you sevenfold.
Even if Wallace doesn't believe in that principle, it clearly believes in him. As a small mercy, we do see his face, and he appears completely unconscious. Of course, this means that the Mad Manitoba has fully donned the mantle of a cackling villain, as he is now monologuing like one as he relates his early history to himself.
Imagine Bruce Wayne's origins, but without all the money. So he was a kid with an idyllic childhood right up until seeing his parents murdered by brigands in a dark alley. One night while they were on a family outing in Montreal.
Also, I think you've uncovered the inspiration for Howe's background in one fell swoop. To bolster this claim, I submit to you another of Kevin Smith's podcasts, Fatman on Batman.
Unlike Bruce, though, he was committed to an insane asylum as one of the Duplessis Orphans.
Who were an actual group of orphans in the 1940s and 50s, reclassified as mentally ill by the Premier of Quebec in order to get more money from the government.
So would he have been a head case before reclassification or because of it? When did he go daffy?
Probably when he was tortured, beaten, and raped by the nurses, priests, politicians, and everyone except the aforementioned janitor, Mr. Tuskegee, who Howe describes as the only human being to have his best interests at heart.
And the way Howe describes the shit show of a backstory, the only thing he skipped was being set on fire. I do thank the director for opting not to show flashbacks that illustrate these horrors. I consider that good taste.
This continued until he was 15, when he ran away to the United States and joined the Navy.
Enter the hack Hemingway.
As he goes on about his origins, he continues to make alterations to Wallace's body so that he can fuse him into the walrus suit. The camera occasionally cuts to a bloodied bone saw here, a tray full of assorted surgical implements there, and a champagne stand, complete with ice, from which his right foot now protrudes.
As he works, I'm amazed at the contradiction that while Wanker's not spraying gallons of blood, there's still an outrageous amount of it everywhere, covering everything. Which leads me to wonder, how does Howe keep a supply of blood types for transfusions? Does he just know what type to keep in stock? It looks like the shelf life of whole blood for transfusions is about 21 to 35 days if he keeps it refrigerated. So who's his supplier? Does he keep him on speed dial?
I doubt he'd have enough on hand.
It is a big mansion, so maybe he has a climate-controlled blood cellar. Even if he has been harvesting from previous incarnations of Mr. Tusk, I'm sure this is one of the tamest items to get in the gory side of the black market.
At the end of the monologue, Howe applauds his own work as the camera pans out to get a good look at the operating table. Wallace now has both legs cut off at the knee, and his upper arms are sewn to his rib cage. The stitching runs along his ribs from his armpits to his elbows, so while he won't be able to move them, his forearms are otherwise unhindered.
His stitching is so piss poor, too. I've seen more effort put into fixing a torn plushie for a toddler.
Also, Wallace's mouth appears to have been mauled.
It's like he was viciously graped in the mouth by a baculum.
We find out later that his tongue has been cut out, so he'll be incapable of human speech, and his upper jaw modified to make room for the tusks.
The upside is that goddamn atrocity of a mustache has been removed and will be replaced by bristles that provide a marked improvement for his original full-man jaw.
We now cut to Teddy and Allie in the car on their way to the airport, while he's driving and she's on her cell talking to the police. She tells them that they're planning to go to every car rental place at the airport with a picture of Wallace to try and find out which one he went to.
Look, Madam Not a Cop, this is one dumb as fuck plan. First of all, I'm curious, which police department are you talking to? If she called 911, she would have gotten her local emergency services. Shouldn't she be calling the American Embassy? I'm thinking that's who she should be talking to. Or is she speaking to the authorities in Winnipeg? If so, then how about letting the professionals, the ones that are already in Manitoba and familiar with their laws and police procedures, actually address the problem? You vapid scuts! Who the fuck knows who she's really talking to? At this point, it could be FBI Special Agent Dale Bartholomew Cooper of Twin Peaks, for all we can tell. Secondly, just where, pray tell, are you going? Shouldn't she be staying put to make sure she's available day and night in case the professionals need to reach her for information? And who
Who has the money for 2 plane tickets at the drop of a hat? Where are they going to stay? Who's paying for all this crap? I know I need to budget that shit. Plus, there's been absolutely nothing to establish that this woman knows anything at all about abductions or their investigations. I mean, really, she's planning to go around with his picture to ask if anyone's seen him. Why? Well, he wasn't going incognito. He would have just used his own damn name and credit cards like a grown person. Police are able to make inquiries with less fuss and get faster results. And as an added bonus, they won't look like some paranoid bitch stalking her ex so she can leave death threats written in menses on his rental car. Thirdly, just because Canada is a different country, it doesn't mean their car rental places are run by hill people who carve their records into their own skin. In 2014, even the most backward rental place would have computers and keep track of their customers and GPS systems for their cars. Prick suggests that they could use the GPS on the car to locate him. Good job, Slapnuts! I'm sure the cops didn't already know that. Come on, that's common knowledge about how they locate stolen vehicles. Hell, OnStar does that. Wouldn't it make even more sense to use the GPS on his cell phone to find Wanker? That way it's more likely to be closer to him than the car. Just saying. And how about we let the cops do both, while you keep your plump, pasty white, I'm qualified because I've seen lots of episodes of Law & Order ass out of the professional's way.
Narrative convenience.
What?
What I mean is, if they don't stick their noses in so hard, we wouldn't have gotten that awesome Scooby-Doo style climax.
Whose side are you on?
Also, breathe.
Thank you.
So, when asked for where to find recent photos of Wallace, Madam Not-a-Cop, Allie, directs them to the official website for their podcast, notseeparty.com. And sooner than Teddy can blurt, spell it, the mystery official hangs up.
Okay, I'm torn here. If I were an official responsible for investigating a reported kidnapping, and the person making the report gave me what sounds like, I'm punking you site, I don't think I would hang up.
Agreed. It would be a sad day when the police have less culpability for hanging up on a call than a customer service rep at a call center for your local cable provider.
Yeah, I would be sure as fuck to make certain it isn't a joke. And if it is, I would slap that SOB in the face with a maximum fine, preferably wrapped around a dead octopus.
Yeah, when they scraped off the rink after a Jets game.
Oh, so now you know something about hockey.
Okay, that sound means it's time for a quick break for someone to hyperventilate Xanax dust from a paper bag. We'll return shortly to reveal Wallace's final form, as well as the ghoulish conclusion to our macabre adventure.
Monkey spanks everywhere!
Hello? Daryl, I'm here. I got the flowers in your note, hon. What's up?
Anne, I want to ask you something important.
Go ahead.
I really like you, Anne. This last month has been the best time of my life, but there's a part of me you've never seen. The real me.
What does that even mean? Let me in and we can talk about this. Wait, I smell incense. Oh, you're not born again or something, are you?
No. Well, I mean, not in the religious sense, anyway, but... And I can't let you in yet. Not until I know I won't lose you forever.
This approach is not helping, just so you know.
I need to know how you feel about cats.
I'm not allergic to them, if that's what you mean.
No, not that. I mean, how much do you like cats?
Well, I know that the naming of cats is a difficult matter, and it isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all is the name that the families use daily.
I'm not talking about the musical, either.
Well, then what are you talking about?
Could you love a cat?
Did you get me a kitten?
No.
Is it a Maine Coon? I love their dodos.
No. I didn't get you a kitten, and I'm not talking about little cats. I'm talking about, well, more of a cat man. Could you love a cat man?
Well, I guess that depends on are we talking about Panthro or Snarf here? Because Panthro's kind of hot, but what the fuck does this have to do with anything? And what's with the music?
Please. I don't know if I can handle not knowing. You'll accept me for the real me.
All right, Daryl, this is getting scary. You either open this door or I'm going to break it down.
Fine. Okay, hold on. There, it's open.
This is what I wanted to show you. This is the real me.
Oh, is this why you wouldn't let me in?
Yes, this is how I see myself. Underneath it all, I am the dread pirate Clawboots.
Well, you had me going for a bit there. I was worried you made a cat suit out of strays or something, but this is nice. Though, you couldn't just tell me why?
I was shy.
You were shy. After the car, and the elevator, and all over the bedroom, and on top of the refrigerator, you were shy?
I was shy.
Well, shy guy, I guess I can see why. Even though they do go with that dashing do-rag and embroidered eye patch, your ears and tail are entirely different shades of fur.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and your fursuit is a bit baggy around the hips. You made it yourself. Yeah, I can tell. I'll hook you up with my guy.
Your guy?
Yep. The best fursuiter in the tri-state area. Makes all of my garb like this one.
Wow. That is a very sexy latex frog suit.
Damn straight it is. And while I'm wearing it, you will address me as Her Majesty, the Royal Empress Rana Llaga.
Oh, okay. I just... Do you always have that with you?
Never leave home without it.
And the purple leather whip?
Patience, my eager beaver.
Were you talking to me? Because I'm a cat.
Oh, so sweet and inexperienced. Now, while I'm slipping into myself, you are going to start stretching. Cats are famous for being limber, after all.
Yes, my lady.
I'm no lady. I am an empress, and I better not catch you breaking character unless I hear the safe word, which is rum-tum-tugga.
Yes, Empress. How did we even get on top of the refrigerator that time?
I was born to motivate.
Welcome back to the Shifty Bastards breakdown of Kevin Smith's Tusk. When last we left Wallace on the operating table, he was side-stitched and utterly defeated in the operating theater of the madman of Manitoba, Mr. Howard Howe. Now, however, the scene is shifted to the dark, dank depths of the maniac's mansion, into what appears to be some kind of aquatic enclosure, much like the penguin pen at your local zoo.
More like a penguin penitentiary.
The rough, rocky platform attached to the back wall juts out into a murky pool that surrounds a mock pier, complete with retractable gangway.
It even seems festively festooned with fake seagull feces. Although there are some props you wouldn't expect to see in such a place.
Projected onto a couple of wall-mounted screens is decaying footage of seagulls and roiling surf.
There's also a beach ball floating in the water.
The lifebuoy from the Anastasia.
And of course, that Chug-a-Lub cup, which is basically Wanker's teddy bear at this point.
Classical music is playing over the sound of gulls squawking, but it's not enough to drown out Wallace's frantic and guttural shrieks. Mad Manitoba approaches his horrified captive while quoting the first stanza of The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll, caressing him carefully and admiring his needlework. At first, we are only shown fleeting glimpses of his motley anatomy before we find ourselves face to face with the fruits of Howe's fantasy, when he bellows, "Walruses never cry!"
Wanker's looking both pissed off and despondent as he's chained to the mock ponder rock. Via a large metal piercing through his skin of his new, quote-unquote, tail, possibly to keep him from straying too far.
The rear flippers also appear to be made of several webbed hands stitched together.
It's not pretty.
We finally come to the completion of Wallace's physical transformation into the eponymous Mr. Tusk. And since this is the bread and butter of the Shifty Bastards, I'd like to linger on the flesh suit surrounding our fallen fortune hunter. First of all, his skin. The walrus suit is apparently made up of skin from multiple people, and we can see several faces stretched and stitched into the whole. The stitches themselves leave gaps throughout, making the seams look somewhat incomplete, if barely functional.
I have to wonder, how does he preserve the skin? It doesn't look tanned and coarse like leather, and even if it was, when it gets wet, it would turn to junk.
Heck, the exposed flesh between the stitches would get infected if he's submerged too. If it was indeed supposed to be a living part of him, that brings us back to the question about blood types and tissue rejection.
Even more so, because there are darker patches, we can assume he used victims of all different skin tones. Mad Manitoba did imply in a very vague way that one of the humans that was kind to him in his childhood was a black man. Not for nothing, but Canada's notoriously very white. I would also think that it would be a little harder to find a variety of colors. So are these hunks of flesh just discolored by time and Hal's preservation process?
That would make Wallace a rawhide, two-pronged, crying, pickled people creeper.
You're lucky Sheb Woolley is not alive to sue your ass for that one.
Agreed! Whether they're pickled parts or bits of black people, it's nice to know that, mad as he is, Hal is not a racist.
If only because he hates every other human being on the planet equally, saying he's only ever known humankind to be an ocean of shit.
And that's mirrored in the shit shape of our sad sack of blubber. The way his realistic walrus suit, quote-unquote, looks to have been sculpted with a mound of some unknown additional material to flesh out the bulk of his back and sides.
Have you ever seen the poo pets? They're amazing. Our mad surgeon may have added extra muscle scavenged from various victims.
But an actual walrus has a bevy of back fat, of which Wallace may be bearing the brunt, all the way down his spine from atop his shoulders. Perhaps this pinniped is being pressed beneath the weight of plush liposuction scavenged from purveyors of soap like Tyler Durden of Fight Club fame.
Suppose it's supplemented by a slump of silicone implants or a crumpled sheet of other surgical scraps.
Maybe it's a melange of all these materials.
Wait, where does the spice fit into this?
I mean a different type of melange, you closet fremen, you.
Now that you mention it, Wallace actually looks kind of like a little souvenir-sized Leto Atreides II.
All except for the extra features on his face, my little sand trout.
I told you not to call me that.
Sorry. Here in his visage we see all that's left exposed of Wallace's original skin, framed by stitches around his nose, chin, and the entire perimeter of his face. His nose has been pressed down, the nostrils permanently flared, so presumably the cartilage of the bridge has been removed. What's more, we have coarse, bristling whiskers in place of his original face fuzz.
A marked improvement over the anemic woollyworms fighting for dominance that he wore before.
Certainly, but these brusque bristles are barely befitting such a majestic maw as the two tapered tusks that frame his tongueless trap. As we'll find out later, the tusks have been bolted to either side of his maxilla.
Not the minima?
I don't think we have one of those.
Where the fuck did Mad Manitoba go to medical school?
That would be Dr. Nick's alma mater, the Hollywood Upstairs Medical College.
Probably the same one as O'Neill Ron Morris, the toxic tush doctor.
Ooh, that was the unlicensed quack now serving time for injecting people with Fix-A-Flat and cement under the guise of plastic surgery. She killed one of her patients and came close to crippling Regine Aringse.
This is also where I will put a disclaimer about DIY body mods. Yes, not only is that actually a thing, but it's also an extremely bad idea. While I personally prefer theatrical prosthetics like makeup and hair dye, since those are things that not only can you take off whenever you need to, as you can also change it up for a different look every day.
Cosplay is the best play.
Yet I know there are some people out there that are a bit more, let's say, committed. Seriously, people, go to a professional if you really want to make this kind of change. Yes, it's expensive. But if you are so sure of your identity, then do it the right way through medical professionals. If you really want to follow in Stalking Cat's paw steps, that is the way to go.
She was that talented computer programmer who decided on elective cosmetic surgery to change her appearance to look like a tiger.
Yep, including tattoos and facial reconstruction. Remember, the alternative might make you end up looking even worse than Mr. Tusk after such a homemade hack job.
After that reveal, Mad Manitoba is waxing nostalgic while addressing Mr. Tusk. He is lamenting the ruination of society, saying that reality television has robbed us of our purity.
To be fair, I have to give a credit to him on this aspect of reality TV. I think of that garbage as stupid people tricks. The fact that we have so many people that are willing to watch them and therefore encourage such behavior is appalling. Don't get me wrong. I understand the schadenfreude of seeing people that are in some way worse off than you and helping you feel better about your existence. While you might not make such foolish mistakes yourself, normalizes that "what is wrong with you" kind of thinking that less capable people will try because they seen it on TV once after they consume a few beers.
Before we move on to the next scene, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Walrus Suits designer, Robert Kurtzman, and his special effects company, Creature Corpse. Or Creature Core. You know, it's that word. C-O-R-P-S. While actor Justin Long certainly gets props for having to bear the weight of the rubbery mass, as well as to emote through its emote hole, Kurtzman must be acknowledged for having created the featured creature. We have a link to creaturecore.net in the show notes, but check out his body of work on IMDb too. Here are some of the titles that leapt out at me from his credits in the makeup department. Bubba Hotep, The Faculty, which had Jon Stewart, Spawn, From Dusk Till Dawn, Vampire in Brooklyn, with Eddie Murphy, Lord of Illusions, In the Mouth of Madness, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Pulp Fiction, Misery, Phantasm 2, Evil Dead 2, and Army of Motherfucking Darkness.
Are you done? Did you get that one out of your system?
Yeah, I'm good.
Moving on. If you have a loved one that's been abducted in another country, would you, A, call the authorities of that country and your embassy while keeping yourself easily accessible in case they have questions for you? Or B, go to that other country, drive around all their back roads in North Buttfuck while yelling out the window for your loved one as if they were a pet that got out?
I choose C. Write and start a Broadway musical about the events surrounding their disappearance, complete with interpretive dance numbers and a wildly imaginative explanation of their fate that leaves enough room for a couple of sequels.
Well, that's interesting. Madam Not a Cop opted for B, spending more time than is reasonable calling out the car window for Wanker like he was a goddamn lost dog as they drove down some of the back roads in Manitoba. If you go that route, at the very least, shake a box of Scooby snacks. Well, that scene was so worth it. I'm so glad they kept it in the movie. I'm guessing this was just to be an establishing shot, because now they're in what I'm presuming is a Mounties office in who the fuck knows what precinct. Perhaps we're supposed to believe that this is the only one station for the Mounties in all of Manitoba.
That's quite possible, as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are a federal and national police force that provides provincial and municipal policing in most parts of the country, except Ontario and Quebec.
How very informative, Dudley Durant.
No! What are you doing to my horse?
Whoa! Moving on. The first detective they talk to in person looks kind of like a sitcom dad.
Oh my god, yes! The actor here is Ralph Garman, who shares some striking similarities to Alan Thicke back when he played the father in Growing Pains. Good eye!
He asks Not a Cop and Prick if Wanker's panicked phone message might have been a prank.
Which is pretty reasonable considering the nature of their podcast.
And even though it seems like something a stupid shit like Wanker would do, the two would-be rescuers say he wouldn't pull something like that after an awkward pause that would make anyone suspicious.
Then, Detective Jason Seaver asks if Wallace could be having an affair.
Which begs the question, what kind of fetishes do Canadians get up to? If calling your girlfriend to say you've been kidnapped and are being dismembered looks like some kind of kinky foreplay. S&M is one thing, but amputating your leg? You need to either get a hobby or tone that shit way the hell down, Canada.
Don't diss the devotees. They are a proud people.
Devoted, you might say.
In response to being asked if there's romantic entanglement involved, we get another, even more suspiciously awkward pause. And then they lie to the detective while both looking very uncomfortable. The officer then informs them that there is no one by the name of Howard Howe in Manitoba, but he will put out a missing persons bulletin for Wallace.
Is that how that works?
Officials wait for the concerned parties to come to their office before putting in a missing persons report to start looking.
He does mention and give to them the number for a private investigator that's also been looking for legless bodies.
For reasons? Should we be encouraging these newbie foreigners to go wandering around the country, potentially stirring up crap as they desperately search for a friend that may or may not be in trouble? We also notice at this point that the closed captioning for the movie does not portray the Canadian accent the detective was clearly using. So does that make it racist or not?
Well, I mean, it would be more of a question of nationalism or linguistic accuracy. It's not really got anything to do with anyone's race.
What about people that are Muslim or have a Liverpoolian accent?
Liverpudlian.
Who dipped their pud in the liver?
Moving on. We're now back to the watery enclave where Mr. Tusk is clearly in dire straits, his mind steadily on the decline.
He had one?
Well, more or less. Mad Manitoba declares it's time for him to learn how to swim, so he uses a winch attached to the tail piercing to drag him into the drink.
No, this is the water that he's been surrounded by this entire time, so he shouldn't have been nearly as surprised at what he sees.
Agreed. He had to know he'd be going for a dip at some point.
I get that he has other things on his mind with the fuck all else to look at.
Barring the home movies of surf and seagulls.
He has been able to see into the wet for a while now, but is even more surprised to see something at the bottom while trying not to drown.
While his head is submerged, he then notices the corpses of others that have been through the same process.
Don't get me wrong. The water's not exactly crystal clear, but still, he could see them through the surface. Why is he surprised by the bodies? But also, it makes me wonder, just how many skin suits has Mad Manitoba made? Inquiring minds don't really want to know. On to the next scene.
This one is one of my favorites. Here we rocket back from the cringeworthy depths of despair into the tender arms of Kevin Smith's comic muse at a fast food joint called Gimli Glider.
This place is like a cross between Dairy Queen and a McDonald's.
The Gimli waitress comes over to drop off some food, and she's played by Kevin Smith's own wife, Jennifer Swalback Smith. Sitting together at the table are Allie and Teddy, while across from them is the investigator suggested by Detective Sitcom Dad from before.
This PI's name is Guy Lapointe.
Guy Lapointe. Who is none other than Johnny, Captain Jack Sparrow, and Edward Scissorhands Depp. Dipped in the most French fried disguise possible, short of being painted up like Marcel Marceau.
I have to give props to Depp. He did a great job playing this character.
I almost didn't recognize him at all beneath the ostentatious mustache, Clouseau-esque accent, bulbous nose, and assorted moles.
Tiny little thing I also love, as he's been speaking to the couple, somehow he seems to go all wall-eyed, lending a delightful touch to his apparently have gone off the, dare I say, Depp end. I'm almost ashamed of myself.
Don't be. Your pun was nearly as perfectly performed as his wandering eye. This character represents as complete a transformation for Depp as Jason Long's transition from Wallace to Walrus. In the credits, Depp is even technically unlisted, appearing with the other actors as Guy Lapointe, played by Guy Lapointe.
Lapointe. He gives us a daffy, gruesome, and lovable breakdown of his investigation into the serial killer that he's been tracking down for the last 10 years. They're all missing their lower legs, the tongue has been removed, and there doesn't seem to be any sexual violation.
He looks at them both and says, "The boys on the force nickname this killer the first wife, because the first wife, she doesn't let you talk, she doesn't let you go anywhere, and she does not fuck you." He even awkwardly tries to explain the joke when he gets no reaction from Allie and Teddy.
He gives them some more gruesome details about the modifications, going so far as to doing a little crucified T-Rex pantomime.
He also mentions that Howe's known kill count so far is 23. As if this character weren't eccentric enough, we also get to see some of his bizarre eating habits. He takes one of the Gimli sliders and smooshes it flat on the Formica table.
Ugh. And I'm trying so hard not to think about how many snotty-nosed little kids had barfed on that table.
To help wash the sliders down, he adds the majority of the contents of a flask to his thick chocolate milkshake, which apparently did not thin it in the least. Johnny Depp simply shines, as maddening and magnificent as Michael Parks in the role of Hao.
Through his narrative, we get a flashback that is actually marked as a flashback. You can't see this, but I'm playing with my nipples.
The scene changes to a sepia-toned monochrome film stock, complete with Parisian street music in the background, Frenching things up to an obscene degree.
He is at some country location talking to Mad Manitoba, who is faking the goofy, itsy-bitsy spider voice. He even rants about a brown recluse being in the bathroom to distract our investigator while he's looking for a missing hockey player.
Named Gregory Gumtree, a reference to the Gumtree post that spawned the script. Hao fools Guy into believing him a simpleton by rambling about himself, his hobbies, and the like.
He even calls himself Bartholomew Moosejaw.
Moussier. Which Guy has since realized is all a facade.
Also, this might be petty, but I got way too much of a kick out of someone who's supposedly French-Canadian saying, "I could almost smell his shit. Pardon my French."
In hindsight, the investigator is now convinced that the person he was searching for was in that very house, and that he could have possibly helped him if he had realized it at the time. Sadly, a month later, they found the hockey player's corpse. He then elaborates his theory that got him kicked off the Sûreté du Québec.
So yes, this private investigator is a former public investigator.
Here's where Guy points out that there was a piece of Gumtree's own tibia lodged in his upper jaw. This is also how we know the white thing Hao had been stroking after Wallace first woke up from his spider bite was most likely Wallace's shin bone being fashioned into a tusk.
It would have been better to be a butt plug.
Ew.
Which confuses the fuck out of me since the core of your shin bone has that creamy marrow center and crab. So how did he shape it to make a proper tusk?
Good point.
Also, towards the end of the movie, you see what looks like his dismembered right foot and shin sticking out of the ice bucket. So are we to believe that both tusks were made from just the first shin bone Mad Manitoba took from the wanker?
He's not just insane, he's incredibly frugal.
He's gone native. I learned something today. Be sure to use every part of your Wallace. So Guy, fuck you, tells the hockey player's mother about the bone fragment, and she replies, "He's making a monster," which sounds pretty good to Guy.
Guy, oop, damn it.
Ha ha! Gilbert, creep, agrees with Mrs. Gumtree's monster theory, only to be laughed off the force.
Cut now back to quality time with Hao and his newfound companion. Our madman is now waxing poetic after apparently Wanker managed not to drown.
I guess he successfully swam? Maybe some of that suit's bulk includes water wings.
As Hao goes on about humanity being an ocean of shit, as if trying to console Wanker and convince him that leaving humanity behind is an upside, and that he should embrace it. While he's doing this, Hao is actually lounging on Wanker as if he was a piece of furniture or beloved Saint Bernard.
And frankly, Wanker looks awkward and uncomfortable about this. I think I would have that same look on my face if I, say, had fallen asleep at the park, and when I woke up, a skunk had climbed onto my chest like a cat and fell asleep. Screaming would be bad. Flailing would be bad. I would spend a panicked couple minutes trying to figure out what the hell to do.
Suddenly, Hao decides it's the best time to start singing, and he sings "Oh Wally Wally," an old Scottish folk song about the rigors of love at sea. Wallace can't help but weep, cough, and drool a bit, which sounds at one point like a tortured violin in accompaniment.
At least he has his beloved chug-a-lug cup. DM.
Hao gets up to leave, but before doing so, he slaps down a raw mackerel for his friend. As he withdraws the pier to strand him with the fish, he says how very hungry Mr. Tusk must be. On the plus side, it does look very fresh. Wallace seems to be incredibly hangry, and, impressively, is able to express this through the prosthesis, as he shuffles towards it, barking mad at Hao's treatment.
I was slightly disappointed with the camera angle, but I understand with the tusks in place, it's hard to get a shot that wouldn't also reveal too much of the spirit gum and tooth black. We've not been able to see if he still has his upper teeth, so I'm trying to figure out how the hell is he supposed to eat, considering the space between his tusks is also very small.
Somehow he manages, as the camera shows him from behind, where you can hear smacking noises. As he pulls away from it, we see that the belly of the mackerel has been gored open.
Lengthwise, which would, again, not have fit between those tusks.
But still, this is the visceral image of an animal devouring its prey, as Howe encourages him and watches gleefully from a ship's porthole built into the only apparent exit. Before we get back to Scooby and the gang, let's play a little game. Kevin Smith wanted Quentin Tarantino to play
Ex-Inspector
Guy Lapointe in the first draft. But Tarantino got the impression he was to be the other insane genius, Howard Howe.
But once he had that cleared up, he bowed out. But just try to imagine Uncle QT.
With this outrageous French accent.
Instead of Johnny D, for at least this scene, you might just be looking through a window into Kevin Smith's mind, as well as an alternate reality.
So we now have ex-investigator Guy admiring Teddy and Allie's rental car from the back seat.
I feel like I'm watching a live-action reboot of the Rescue Rangers, as written by Walt Disney's head, after he'd been thawed out and reanimated through the power of cocaine.
I'm picturing J. Jonah Jameson as a head in a jar.
That works.
Guy asks Allie what Wallace likes to do to get ready for long drives, since the message said he would be driving for 2 hours. Guy says his own ritual involves getting the double-double with 8 sugars and just a dash of cream before he can even start the car. Now, if I were to walk into a Tim Hortons and order that, I'd be getting a coffee with 10 sugars and 2 and a dash creams.
You're not making any sense. What the fuck's a Tim Horton?
They're the Canadian donkeys.
I understand completely.
But with soup.
Nope. You lost me. How do you put soup in a donut?
Maybe it's a donut bowl.
Like a bread bowl?
Yeah.
But soup in a donut? What about gravy?
With gravy in a donut, you could have poutine anytime.
The dogs will love it.
Either way, they're talking about food, like Jules and Vincent discussing the Royale with cheese in Pulp Fiction.
At first I thought this was daft, but then the bright side is that this actually seems to be somewhat a reasonable question. Madame Not-a-Cop comments that he likes big, goofy convenience store drinks, and since the last place they knew for sure he was supposed to be was the Kill Bill Kid's house, they have that address.
And in one of the messages to Teddy, he said that he was at a bar named H, so they should be able to find that nearby-ish.
Then they hunted around the H bar to show his photo at convenience stores that have said stupid novelty cups. I'll also concede at this point, while he's no longer an official investigator, that does not mean he's actually the incompetent imbecile he seems to be.
So they find the A2Z Quickie Mart where Wallace antagonized the 2 blonde clerks, both named Colleen, by the way. They refer to him as Mr. Mustache as soon as they see his photo.
While the group is talking to the ladies, I notice for the first time behind them is a giant wall of maple syrup.
There's also a t-shirt that says red, white, but never blue.
I need that. And then we're treated to an extended flashback of the scene where Wanker came in for his beloved chug-a-lug and was a pushy douche to everyone around.
He rips on the Colleens by saying, "How's everything over at Degrassi, huh? You kids still getting knocked up and shot at?"
Before hassling for a pen and the paper as condescendingly as possible, which admittedly they are slow to hand over to him.
Only because they're too busy staring at him in amazement for his utter lack of couth.
I could handle the God bless yous, but I really wanted to punch him for #thanks. Winker then takes the implements and then turns to support the pad of paper on the back of a woman standing next to him while he writes. Yes, a random patron in the market as a desk in order to take down his destination.
Hey, how is a patron like a writing desk?
Just stop.
What?
#not my Mad Hatter.
Oh.
Both the clerks and the customer are dumbstruck by his gall as the lady gives an "Are you fucking kidding me?" glance at the clerks. After he finishes writing down the information, he thanks Mad Manitoba and says he'll be seeing him soon. When he turns back to the Colleens, they're holding disposable combs under their noses like mustaches while mocking him.
Surprisingly, he actually looks hurt, even though his own is just this side of an electrical tape mustache that would have made Groucho Marx cringe and cherish his grease paint.
Back to the current time in the Quickie Mart, Guy asks for the notepad so he can do a rubbing on the top sheet in order to reveal the impression of Howe's directions.
Teddy says he saw that trick in The Big Lebowski, which is exactly where Guy says he learned it. Of course, the clerks are stunned.
How is this a new thing that they've never seen before? I'm pretty sure we did that in elementary school, or on Mr. Wizard, or something.
It was used in North by Northwest, Les Miserables, Columbo, Murder, She Wrote, Terry Pratchett's Jingo, and the classic point-and-click adventure game Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Father.
Damn it, now I've got that MIDI version of When the Saints Go Marching In stuck in my head, dick. Also, it's a good thing that nobody used that notepad since, because it sure as hell wouldn't help if they did a rubbing and got somebody's grocery list. Half a gallon of milk, 3 disposable cameras, Popular Mechanics magazine, an economy pack of condoms.
If I worked there, he would have uncovered a surprisingly detailed illustration of some kind of nude muscle-bound moose or caribou man. It's not my thing, mind you, but it's still very nice. Oh well, that's a dead end. C'est la vie.
You always got in trouble for drawing at work, didn't you?
Can't fight the muse!
Especially if he has big moose muscles.
Which are necessary. He's a lumberjack after all.
Stereotype. Back to the enclosure, we see Mad Manitoba now swimming naked with Wanker. Here he finishes his story about when he was shipwrecked on Ponder Rock with the walrus as his only companion. Flashback to the islet, where he said he had been waiting for 6 months to be rescued and had to kill and eat his sweet savior walrus for fear of starving. Do you think he used a teriyaki sauce? The walrus had only been dead for an hour when the ship appeared to bring him back to civilization. Having seen walrus blood on his hands, as he waves his arms to flag down the rescuers, he dies inside.
And that's probably the moment Hal truly cracked. Back in the present, Hal is casually dunking Wallace's head under the water in an effort to bring out his survival instinct through the time-tested art of waterboarding.
Not boogie boarding.
He even says that he's taught him just how cruel men can be, toughening him up for a final confrontation, saying, "If I truly brought out the walrus in you, this time you might just prevail."
Could Wanker actually survive this nightmare? Guess who's about to find out? Young and doughy Fred, Latina Daphne, and Shaggy with a pseudo-foreign accent syndrome. That's who.
Teddy, Allie, and Guy. Yeah, pretty good. Although, if we're doing Rescue Rangers, Teddy would be Chip, Allie would be Gadget, and Monterey Jack would be Guy. He's got the crazy eyes and everything. Oh, and for the rescuers, Allie would be Miss Bianca, Teddy would be Bernard, and Guy would be, I don't know, the Great Mouse Detective.
Who are you?
Moving on.
The posse has arrived at the address from the notepad. Could you imagine the embarrassment if they had gone to the wrong place and ended up at some kid's party?
At one of those places with games, a ball pit, and pizza-scented cardboard.
Every hour on the hour, there's a animatronic horror show playing in center stage.
And the lead singer for the animal band is a fucking walrus.
Wanker may not survive, but at least we get to see someone tackling a singing robot.
In order to save their friend, the investigator gets some weapons from his trunk and offers handguns to the Americans. Teddy is reticent to take the firearm, and Guy is confused as hell about an American not wanting a gun.
Madam Not a Cop gives Prick some lip and insists that he take the goddamn gun. Guy takes the rifle for himself.
Guy. And firepower doled out, they head inside Howe's mansion. Cut back to the enclosure where Mad Manitoba is monologuing about marking the occasion of the walrus's demise, having done so for the anniversary of this event for the last 15 years, where he undergoes a ritual to allow his newly reborn Mr. Tusk a chance to go full walrus in a battle to the death. But he says he's hoping that Mr. Tusk will win this time, though even if he does go free, he will be forever the walrus monster Howe made him to be.
As he's speaking, we now see he's actually wearing his very own walrus suit and charges at Wanker for some walrus-on-walrus violence, slashing at him with his own tusks attached to the suit and not his face, bastard. All this is happening while there's a nature documentary of combatant walruses being played on the wall behind them. Wanker is now screaming in hostility as if he's getting worked up and losing his temper. Apparently, Wanker had had enough and is currently going total walrus shit.
As he's bellowing, he's so loud our rescue rangers can hear the battle in progress. So we cut back and forth between the fight and Guy's gang. Wallace is doing the best he can against Mad Manitoba while they search for him. They pass through different rooms of the home and eventually make their way to the sewing room, where they gawk in horror at the anatomical charts, the bloodied surgical artifacts, and of course, the right leg on ice.
I noticed the leg still has all its proper coloring, so it couldn't have been separated for very long. I think it only takes a few hours at most to drain of the oxygenated blood.
I won't ask how you know that.
As they're doing this sightseeing, we cut back to Manitoba, explaining to Wanker that he made it much further than the others, and that he was sure that his survival instinct was kicking in.
But unfortunately for Wallace, so had his own. Hal then stands up and out of his custom-made walrus suit, pulling it apart at the seams.
That cheater! Why didn't he sew himself in?
He appears completely naked and covered in blood, and is also suddenly wielding the infamous baculum.
I have to wonder where and how he has been holding that during combat. And just what was he planning on doing with it, if and when he had won outright?
Yeah, I'm afeared. Anyway, he holds it over his head like a cudgel and steps forward screaming. Wallace takes this opportunity to use his tusk to stab through Hal's foot, distracting him before shoving the old man down onto his back. Wallace charges forward and starts impaling Hal's chest and neck with his tusks. With his dying breath, he tells him how proud he is to have finally brought back his Mr. Tusk. With the transformation complete, our villain dies a happy man.
This is when the rescue rangers charge in and see Wanker in all his horrid glory, hovering mad-eyed over a gored and naked old man. Madame Nauticops starts wailing, which catches Wanker's attention. He then starts doing his own, barking, yelling at her, and bouncing like an overexcited pug that's trying to scare away a bigger dog from his treat.
Guy steps forward with his rifle and takes aim. Then, darkness.
Apparently, we're now 1 year in the future, with Madame Nauticop and Prick pulling up outside a building with something wrapped in a newspaper, both of them looking very somber. At first, I thought perhaps they were at a cemetery, and that they were bringing flowers.
But no, as they approach, a sign on the building declares it to be the Manitoba Exotic Animal Exhibit.
And it does look a bit run down.
They go around back to an enclosure that has a small pool of murky water with a beach ball floating in it, multiple chug-a-lug cups strewn around, and a prefabricated mud hut doghouse. They call down to the enclosure, announcing themselves without getting a response.
And then she unwraps the newspaper, which doesn't have flowers. We find it contains a mackerel instead, which they toss down to the hut, drawing out what's left of Wallace into the open, as it's his favorite treat. And he hasn't aged a day since.
He's just like they found him in Hal's enclosure.
And now we see that he can close his mouth to happily smack and slurp away at the fish, unlike his reaction the first time. Allie gets his attention, and he seems to have one last flashback of the two of them talking. She tells Wallace that she can't remember the last time he cried.
He tries to play it off, as it's simply not a manly thing to do, but she corrects him with a story about her grandfather, where he tells her it's good to cry. It separates us from the animals. It shows you have a soul. Back in the present, she declares her love for him, and Wallace, for just a moment, stares at her sadly, moaning and weeping, before Tusk, the mighty victim, sadly slipped into his cave.
As Prick and Madame Nauticop leave, the beach ball is such a distraction on the water in the way it's zipping around on the pool. Almost like it's on remote control. Its motion is completely unrelated to any of the wind that you can see affecting the plant life.
While it's good to know that's all it takes to distract you from all the pathos swirling about, this brings us to a touching ending to our sweetly sickening story, where we're left looking at a man who intentionally gave up a chunk of his humanity from the inside before Mad Manitoba ever meddled in his meat. That brings my kill count to 23 off-screen, 1 on-screen for Hal, and 0.9 for all that was stripped away from Wallace. This was a story with a graphic, surgical transformation that gets trussed up with some mind-fuckery for the finisher.
Then he seems to regain a tiny fraction of it at the end, but only after losing all that was outwardly human. What is sad is that for some people, it only matters if it shows. Regardless, it still doesn't change that this is a super fucked up ending.
That they left him like that? Yeah.
And instead of after rescuing him, then bringing the man to a goddamn hospital to have as much that could be reversed and rehabilitate him, they instead put him in an animal exhibit. Don't get me wrong, he was a beast before Hal got a hold of him, and I would expect him to have both mental and physical scars for life, but keeping him in an enclosure at the zoo is a bit much.
It's just as disarming and unsettling as the rest of the story, and makes for a grim finale.
Over the ending credits, you get a snippet of the podcast which sparked the whole concept of this movie.
And at the very end, we get a scene of the investigator bemoaning that he ate too many sliders, and now he's having digestive problems because I guess that shit needs to end.
Speaking of endless torment, how do you feel about sequels?
Don't you dare.
Because the sequel, starring the two Colleens, is already available on Netflix.
The blonde clerks from the Quick Stop?
Yep, and Yoga Hosers, the E to Z, becomes the backdrop for a Nazi monster freak show beatdown of epic proportions. Plus, we get more ghee.
They fight Nazis or the Nazi party?
And it has some of that Clerks flavor that launched Kevin Smith's notoriety as a filmmaker.
That was so awesome.
He told a story on Smodcast after the premiere of Tusk at the 2014 Toronto International Film Festival about how he and his wife were looking over some of the scenes with the Colleens. Unable to figure out why he was enjoying writing them so much, his wife chides him for not seeing that they're basically blonde Canadian versions of Dante and Randall.
And Nazis.
Nazi meat monsters.
Nazi worst? I'm listening.
Good. Now that I have your attention, how do you feel about trilogies? Because the final chapter in this series is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic horror comedy called Moose Jaws.
Moussier.
Ha. You might like it since it stars Harley Morenstein of epic mealtime fame.
I'm going to stop listening to you if you're talking about someone who's famous on YouTube, because that's what started this whole crap.
He's Grizzly Canadams, the CATSA agent who tells Wallace Canadians are hung like moose.
Ooh, then I'm here for the long haul.
The tagline for Moose Jaws is, like Jaws, with a moose.
I'm never listening to you again.
And that's it for episode 2 of the Shifty Bastards podcast. But before we evacuate your ear holes, let's find out what next month will bring. We'll be stepping away from Smith's trilogy of love letters to Canada, but that doesn't mean we're leaving the Great White North behind for our next review of something shifty.
In episode 3, we're going to be sitting down with one of my personal favorites, Clive Barker's Nightbreed, in all its angsty goth glory.
The original theatrical release from 1990 inspired many a baby bat.
Like myself.
Now, however, we get to sup on the sublime director's cut from 2014.
Which we will be lovingly slashing to pieces.
If you enjoy our flavor of madness, please consider hurling your loonies in our direction at patreon.com/shiftybastards.
You'll get patron-only extended editions, complete with bloopers, outtakes, deep cuts, special readings, and other delightful detritus.
Can't scrape together the ducats? How about helping us out with a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher? You can also find us on YouTube.
Want to get in touch with the Shifty Bastards to correct our vocabulary?
Gush about your favorite transformation media?
Or scold us for our scandalous omissions?
Then we encourage you to tweet at Shifty Bastards on Twitter.
Thanks to Kevin Smith for creating such a delightfully disturbing cinematic monsterpiece.
Thanks to Llaga for suffering my madness enough to play my amazing co-host for this episode.
Thanks also to the selfless Afro-Deutsch for their germanely Germanic generosity.
Thanks to our resident sports specialist, Mac, for his encyclopedic knowledge of milestones in hockey violence.
Seriously, when we needed that Bruins beatdown reference, he gave us the answer faster than I could have typed out that text.
The music used in this episode was Summon the Rock by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. and was licensed under a Creative Commons Attributions 3.0 license before being callously cut and crimped by myself, Crafty.
Until next time, this is Llaga.
And Crafty.
Signing off.
And reminding you to stay
shifty.
The preceding podcast was a production of Meteor Press, LLC. Copyright 2017. All rights reserved.